amazing things happen. Revelations are made and cultural norms are smashed in tonight's gospel reading from John. From an exegetical standpoint, this reading is chock full of ideas being dropped, punctuated by the sound of stereotypes being smashed and traditions being trampled. It's what they call a target-rich environment. It's a turkey shoot of ideas. And the struggle here is to find the ones that touch us most directly. A long time ago, when I was young, I used to love doing those visual puzzles where you had to find out what was wrong with a certain picture. You know, there'd be this kind of busy, complex line drawing of some scene, and then there'd be a caption telling you that there were X number of things wrong with this picture, and you had to find them all. You know, like there'd be a third ear growing out of someone's head, or there'd be a mouse dialing a telephone, or something like that. And the object was to find and list all of the mistakes, all of the errors in the picture. So I want to start tonight by looking that way at this vignette, this scene from the Gospel of John. And if we know what we're looking at, if we really understand it, we understand what we're reading, we can immediately pick out a whole handful of discrepancies, a handful of things that are just wrong with this picture. Start with Jesus is talking to a Samaritan. Well-bred, faithful, observant Jews of his time just didn't do that. Samaritans were the black sheep of the Israelite family, and one simply did not associate with them by choice. Worse yet, Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman. He's carrying on a conversation with this woman that didn't have anything to do with housework or cooking or having children, so there was no reason for him to be stooping down and talking to her. She was reaching beneath his social class. To the casual passerby of this conversation, it would have been slightly shocking. Worse still, Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman without her husband or her brother or her father or some other protective male present. They were unchaperoned, and that was just totally improper because it was important for these poor defenseless creatures to be protected by a trustworthy male at all times. And finally, and this is the kicker, you have to be eavesdropping on the conversation to realize it, that Jesus is talking to a Samaritan woman about theology. He's talking to her about things that matter, things that are central to your relationship with God, and things that are, let's face it, they're kind of hard to understand. So obviously, he would have no business talking to a woman about such things. It's for the men, at least, of this day and time. Such a conversation would have been about as meaningful as the conversations that I have with my dog, Jonas. If you're a dog owner, you know the kind of conversation when you patiently explain something to them. I'm only going to be gone a little while. And when he's just staring at you and you're eating, you say, I'm not going to give you any of this because it wouldn't be good for you. And he just looks at you. It's an obvious waste of time. And then there's one final thing that we can infer from the setting of this conversation, because we're told that it happened about noon by the well. And any respectable woman at that time would not have been out drawing water in the midday sun, because water was drawn by the women in the morning, and then it lasted throughout the day. So the fact that she chose to go when there would be, or should be anyway, nobody there, tells us that she was probably of low status even for a Samaritan. She was consciously trying to avoid others, trying to avoid the stares and the whispered conversations and the judging looks. seems pretty obvious that she was a woman with problems. Lucky for her, she met the man who had solutions. As the conversation starts, well, Jesus starts it by engaging in one of those kind of elliptical conversations that he seems to be so good at. Because after that initial exchange, he says to her, basically, lady, if you knew who you were talking to, you'd be asking me for a drink instead of me asking you. And she kind of stumbles over that one a little bit. But eventually, with his patient teaching and his persistence in breaking through all of this society's norms by continuing to reach out to her, by explaining to her, by talking to her as though she was on his level, she does come to understand sort of this living water that he offers. Or at least she understands that something very special is happening there at the well, and that somebody very special, could it be the Messiah, the one I'm waiting for? That was her question. She knew that someone very special had come to this place. It must have set her heart pounding. 2,000 years later, we might struggle with the idea of living water more than this woman or her contemporaries may have. Because to them, the concept of living water already meant something. It was a term, it was a phrase that they were familiar with. Because to them, living water was water that came up out of a spring. It came out of a spring and it flowed. And it was this living water, and it was only the living water that could be used for ritual cleansing, or such an important part of their religious tradition. For an observant Jew, if you became ritually impure, which could happen in many, many ways, from touching a dead body to being in proximity to a woman during her period, or any number of things in between that we would see as insignificant. But to become pure again after that, a man would need to be immersed in what was called a mikvah, or a ritual bath. And that bath was filled with living water. In order for a priest to serve in the temple in Jerusalem, in order for him to be present at the altar of the Lord and to remember the way they think, to be present, to be in the presence of the Lord, he had to be purified by living water. So the sacredness of the idea of living water was understood. And in this moment, this core moment in his teaching, where Jesus reached across a divide that had split Samaritan from Jew for 600 years, where he affirmed that a Samaritan, and a woman at that, had as much human worth in the eyes of God as any man. In this moment, he promised that anyone who was open to receiving his teaching, anyone who trusted him, anyone who through him would find their way back to God, would have a source of purity. They would have a wellspring of cleansing water that could wash away their sin, and this would be within them. It would be ever flowing. It would never stop. It was a miraculous promise. For just as Moses, following the will of God, was able to bring life-sustaining water to the children of Israel when they were in the wilderness, so Jesus, by fulfilling God's plan, by laying down his life for us, would be able to give all of us the water that we need to survive. There is an irony here, of course, and I think it's a purposeful irony, because this incident occurred in Sychar. And this encounter with the Samaritan woman at the well is the first time in the Gospel of John. It's the first time that Jesus fully identifies himself as a Messiah. And it's not to another Jew, it's not even to a man. You have to believe that happened because he was making a point. You have to believe that this is Jesus drawing a line in the sand by reaching out to non-Jewish, lower-class, second-class citizens and saying, if you drink the water I give, if you believe in me, if you embrace who I am, then I won't forget you. Ever. You'll never be thirsty again. You'll never have to be in the wilderness wondering how to find your way back to God again. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done, because my salvation is open to all of humanity. How many times have we sought out that own message in our lives? How many times have we sat parched by the life-sapping heat of our own sin and wondered what could take away this thirst that we felt? The answer was here. The answer is 2,000 years old, and it's still as fresh today as it was when it was first uttered. It's still here. It's inside of us. Forgiveness is bubbling up out of our hearts like water coming from a rock in the desert, and it comes from Jesus Christ, who promised us the living water that will cleanse us. Moses, moving with the power of God behind him, struck the rock at Rephidim and at other places, and it opened up and it caused water to flow out and gave life to his people. And Jesus, through the power of his love, through the sacrifice, through his death and resurrection, strikes at the hardness in our own hearts and causes them to open so the living water, the living vitality of his word can flow out and cleanse us, prepare us to be in God's presence. As I said at the beginning, there's more to this story. There's the sowers and the reapers. There are those who plant the Word of God and those who come along to harvest the result. There's the idea of Jesus being nourished not by food, but by serving God. And there's so much more, but I'm going to leave it here tonight. I'm going to leave it here. And I'm going to leave you with those bottles that I passed out. Those bottles are to remind you, by the standards of Jesus' day, those bottles are actually living water because the water comes from a natural spring. So it says on the label. We'll trust it. And you can take these bottles home, you can drink them. But my hope is that they might also help you to remember what they represent. Represent a source of water in your life and a source of life in your soul. A source of hope and grace and forgiveness that's never going to go dry. That was and that is the promise of Jesus Christ. Amen.